Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of Philosophisn't. This is the show where we dive deep into traditional philosophy, history, and political theory. And we also explore the personal life philosophies and motivations of some of the most creative, entrepreneurial, and hardworking people in today's world. Today on the show, I have Margaret Rowlett. She's a lawyer who does worker compensation law, and she's also an activist and organizer with the Greensboro Solar Power Now Coalition and is it Greensboro Earthquakers?
Yes.
Yeah, Guilford Earthquakers.
Greensboro, yes.
Earthquakers. And today I invited her on the show because I've been really curious about green energy lately. But I noticed normally this conversation usually looks something like, what should we do on the national level? What should the federal government do? And there's been a lot of talk in the past 2 years about the Green New Deal. So this is a local coalition designed to get solar power going in Greensboro, I understand. And so, Margaret, can you tell us more about what the coalition does and how you started this work?
Yeah, so I mean, we totally embrace that saying of think globally, but act locally. So I think that's kind of what you're starting out by pointing out, that with the climate crisis, it's really hard to know how to get a handle on it and do something just as an individual. What can you do? It's such a big problem. But locally, I'm with a group of Quakers. You mentioned Greensboro Earthquakers, members of the Religious Society of Friends here locally, who came together and wanted to try to do something in the realm of environmentalism. And back in 2018, we joined together with some other local groups, including Emerging Ecology, the local branch of the Sierra Club, and some others, Environmental Stewardship Greensboro also. And we formed the Greensboro Solar Power Now Coalition. We are a group of local volunteers wanting to do environmental work. We're not people selling solar panels or anything like that, which sometimes I think is confusing about our name. And so I should probably just mention how we chose the name and why we focused on solar power. It really does come back to that idea of how on the local level do you access green energy and what's available to people. So, locally, we can't create our own wind turbines. We can't create, a nuclear power plant or do other types of clean energy, but people can access rooftop solar. In fact, I don't know if you ever go up and down Friendly Avenue, but my church is First Friends Meeting, and we just recently got solar panels on our building, which we're really excited about. New Garden Friends Meeting over by the Guilford College campus also has solar panels. So we decided to put that in our name to emphasize, let's do what we can locally, and rooftop solar is one of those.
Okay.
There's a lot of ways to access living sustainably. And I should mention another form of energy that we have access locally is geothermal, if you know about the Proximity Hotel. So the Proximity Hotel was built to be very sustainable and get the highest level of LEED certification, which they did. And let me put in the chat a link to information about the sustainable practices of the Proximity Hotel. If you're not familiar with it, I think this would interest you.
Fascinating. So they do the same thing that's known to be done in Iceland, where they actually use the heat from magma, or the heat from the core of the earth to heat.
Yeah, they're using that in their refrigeration. So that is somewhat accessible, but overall we chose to put solar power in our name. And as a local coalition, we've engaged in 2 campaigns. Mm-hmm. And so when I use the term campaign, I mean that we set a goal. We figured out who we wanted to ask to do something in support of clean energy and to work to avoid I guess we can't avoid the climate crisis. It's already started, but to try to respond to it.
As possible.
Right. And so our first campaign that we chose, we decided we were inspired by the Ready for 100 campaign of the Sierra Club. I'm going to put a link to that campaign in the chat as well, so you'll have information about that. But the Sierra Club is encouraging cities and localities to commit to 100% renewable energy in their operations, and actually not just in their operations, but throughout their whole, whatever their territory is of that locality. And so back in 2018, when our group started and we were inspired by the Ready for 100 campaign, we decided to ask the city of Greensboro to commit to transition to 100% renewable energy by, well, we first started out with, I think, 2035, but ultimately moved to 2040. And Greensboro the city council had previously said they would love to see Greensboro become the greenest city in the Southeast.
Wow.
So yeah, we were excited to try to connect with the city over this issue. Have you heard of the city's Community Sustainability Council?
I have not, but before we go on, I do want to ask a question, and I will put the links that you sent me in the chat on the YouTube channel, so like all the people can do further research as well. I'm curious, as a Quaker and a lawyer, does your professional and religious background play into your passion for green energy in some way? Because I know a fair amount of Quaker theology from going to Guilford College, which is a Quaker school. I don't know if there was ever anything specifically about taking care of the earth, but I'm curious about the combination of workers' compensation and green energy. Do you see those two as like linked at all, or is personal and professional separate for you?
Well, I have found in my job that it's very rewarding to be able to work for individuals to try to improve their lives and to help them navigate a complex system that workers' compensation is. Sometimes for people who have more serious claims, they need someone who's been through the process before to help guide them and to advocate for them and to tell their story. So that's an aspect of my work that has been really meaningful to me. And I guess the idea of advocacy, being drawn to that in my job and then being drawn to that in kind of like my volunteer activities, it's kind of a theme. But I'm advocating really, in a way for the earth, but more importantly for all the people living on the earth and all the people in the future who will, people we don't even know. But one day I want to be judged as a good ancestor to the people who come after us. And I think that's, there are a lot of Quakers, members of my religious community, who are also very interested in that same goal.
Is there and you mentioned the climate crisis earlier. I imagine many of my viewers will know what this is, but for any viewers who might have only heard it in headlines, how would you describe the climate crisis? What is it exactly, and why does it need to be averted?
Well, I think early on in trying to help people understand it, we use the term global warming, because bottom line, the earth is heating up. I think people moved away from using that term global warming because the confusing part of it is that during this, in the big picture, as the earth heats up, there are times when the weather just becomes more extreme in a lot of different ways, and it can even include some colder weather or some storms that, don't necessarily in people's minds fit with the idea that the earth is heating up. Storms that have more water content just due to the way that the heating earth works.
Does this have to do with the melting of the polar ice changing the jet stream? Because the polar ice, from what I understand, is like the regulator, which regulates the temperature of our planet and sets the ocean currents and jet stream. So if that changes, then it can make some places colder, even, and some places a lot hotter. And so that's why you hear about both long droughts and like hurricane storms in other regions.
Right. And it's already, the rising ocean waters have already impacted communities, even in the US, if you look at what's happening, like on the coast of Alaska and other places. So it's already pretty serious. And it's just going to get more so. And when you read about or look or research and learn about coastal flooding, the tidal flooding that goes on, that's already really impacting a lot of communities, that the climate crisis is already here.
I see. I once saw a Wall Street Journal article where it was like how global warming can benefit the wine industry. And I was just thinking, gosh, that is like the worst. I mean, it's true. Like some regions will actually benefit, but that's
or
like
at
the
least
worst.
temporarily,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah, very,
Mhm.
very temporarily. But
Yeah.
for like an audience who might not know what climate change is, like I would not want to like even like mention that like, without mentioning
Well,
severe
we're
downside.
kind of with our group starting with the belief that, or the idea that most people now know what the climate crisis is, and most people are pretty much on board. Like that's a pretty majority opinion, to be on board and trying to reverse it. We want to see it go the other way. I think most people are there. And we know in North Carolina, there's some cities that are doing some really great work on their own in trying to in their own locality do what they can to fight the climate crisis and focus. What I'm talking about mainly here is energy, because we know that the way that we power our lives is a huge contributor
Right.
to what's happening with the climate crisis. And so I put another link out for you about the town of Boone, where
Yeah,
Appalachian State's in Boone, right? Okay,
that's
yeah.
right.
So they made some great progress toward achieving renewable energy goals. And I just heard about them on the news yesterday that they're actually ahead of schedule. It's very impressive
They're
to
doing
getting to trying to achieve
very good.
100% renewable energy in their town operations. So having Greensboro be on board, also trying to achieve some of these same goals, because I wanted to let you know that the city of Greensboro in December of 19 did pass a resolution committing, as we had asked, to try to achieve 100% renewable energy in city operations by 2040.
Okay. I'm curious. So the climate crisis is a global and national level crisis, but is there any benefits that's just localized to Guilford County? For example, a couple of years ago, there was a huge scandal about Duke Energy putting coal ash and toxic coal ash in ponds that were not correctly covered or had leakages or something. So with moving towards green energy, do you think we'll be able to see either less of that or some kind of other benefit or lack of some other negative?
Hmm. Yeah, no, I definitely think so. Let's talk about resiliency of a community. So if you have, if we can move toward everyone having more rooftop solar access, whether they're in apartment buildings or what type of living setting that they're in, if they could have access to the energy of rooftop solar, they become much more resilient and less dependent on the electrical grid at times of like heavy storms we might see where there are power outages. But if the sun's still out or you have a battery, see, as battery technology gets better and we can store some of that energy. I know someone who has an electric vehicle and made sure that prior to the last time it was predicted that we were going to have a storm that would knock out power, that their electric vehicle was well charged, so that if needed to, they could go and like charge their phones and things and warm up in their car if they needed to. But that's an example of the batteries technology that store energy, and the rooftop solar would just give us much more resilience in those situations.
I never thought of that, but I have to ask though, if this technology is so practical, then like why hasn't it already been fully implemented? It seems to me from what I've researched about the industry is that the technology exists. Isn't like the biggest barrier the lack of lithium batteries for storing the energy?
I think you're right that battery technology is like a key piece of the puzzle, because one of the things we know about the power system as a whole is that people don't need energy just during daylight hours when solar is available. And
Right.
so how do our utilities provide us with energy at times when the sun's not out?
Right.
Or in the case of, North Carolina with its coastline could potentially have access to lots and lots of offshore
Yeah.
wind energy, which is supposed to be potentially a resource that could fund just a huge percentage of our energy needs. But maybe the wind dies down certain times, and then how do we compensate for that? And batteries are going to be potentially a key piece to that. I mean, I think a necessary piece. And it may also be why
No,
ultimately we need to turn to nuclear power.
I meant to ask more about political and economic reasons. You said that now like everyone's like on board with fighting the climate crisis. I was a little surprised at that. I wouldn't have suspected that because well, maybe I just haven't followed the news on climate specifically as much recently because I read more foreign policy news. But do you really think that like the entire political spectrum and like the leadership class and the constituents are all on board with it?
I would never say all, and
Okay.
I wouldn't say the full spectrum of
Mostly,
people.
usually,
I,
yeah.
I think I was just trying to speak in terms of where I think the majority of people are. It's
Okay.
my understanding from polls I've seen. I can't cite any specifically, but that the majority of people do understand that the climate crisis exists, and hopefully they understand it's already here. It's already impacting people. Have you
Well,
seen?
hmm.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, my response to that would be just because they know it exists. I don't know if it seems urgent to them. I mean, um, in political science, we have we actually used game theory in one of my classes to discuss like why like there hasn't been more like global action to come together on climate change, and there's this model of
Yeah.
thinking about the world as like an individual nation. And so when an individual nation has to invest a lot of money in green energy, it's not like that they can just like do that and like fix their own climate, right? The benefit is spread out to all the other nations. And so you hear in political debates, people will say like, well, no, we can't afford to like invest in green energy because like the others won't do it. So why should we do it? And there's that sense of like a stag hunt situation where you can't get like, unless you get everyone on board, then why would I like get on board anyway? Have you seen that at all?
Well, internationally, it seems to me, from what I understand, especially like at the most recent International Climate Conference, COP26, I believe is the name of it.
Yeah.
The rest of the world seems to be pretty ready to move forward in large part. Like the US in recent years has been kind of the drag. I mean, I'm not saying everybody's in the same place, but there has been a lot of international push, especially from just general citizens around the world. I understand that so many people were there, trying to lobby for making the changes we need to make.
Right.
But maybe you've seen that movie Don't Look Up on Netflix, where,
I've heard of that. I've heard of that. Yeah.
yeah, the comet's heading toward
Is
the
that
earth,
the one,
and
yeah, where he's trying to warn the people
yeah,
about the meteor? Oh,
yeah, comet's headed toward the earth, and people are like,
well,
you
what I
know,
mean is, I mean, typically in politics, when politicians want to go to the constituents and ask to raise money and spend taxes, the constituents want to see like something tangible back from that. And maybe there's like something about the way we think about climate change is sort of this abstract, like in the future problem. I don't really see like people considering, except those who are like very devoted, but just among in general conversations with people, I don't think like climate change is like the first thing that we think about when we wake up in the morning, even though it should be.
yeah,
Because it really
I
is.
think it should be.
I mean, MIT, Michigan Institute of Technology, actually came out with a study due to economic, environmental, and social factors that civilization will not exist in 2040. That's the MIT prediction. In 20 years, there's no more like organized human civilization. Have you heard of that?
I have not.
Yeah.
I can say that, the things that I have
The
read around
awareness or
sea level rise are very concerning, because that's an area where a lot of people who live in coastal areas will become displaced persons. They will become kind of like even in our country, in the United States, there's a projection of several million people over the course of, the next few decades becoming internally displaced persons, and kind of the sense of refugees of
yeah.
needing to move to other places in the country. And if we're not preparing for that kind of thing, how are we going to handle that? How are we going to cope?
Entire islands have been sinking into the Pacific. I mean,
Yeah,
entire cultures are losing their grounds.
yeah.
Huh.
I could recommend a really great book on sea level rise by Orrin Pilkey, who it's called Sea Level Rise, by Orrin Pilkey, who is a retired professor from Duke University, and he writes about all the projections for what's going to happen in coastal areas. But yeah, our group really, though, is trying to focus on how locally can we impact the climate change by changing how we're powering our community. And we feel really great about what the city of Greensboro is doing and the fact that they've just recently decided to form an Office of Sustainability, and they're hiring someone to work in the city government now, a full-time paid employee, to be a sustainability manager. We're really excited about that. And so I wanted to tell you too, though, about the new campaign we started on after the city process got underway and they passed their resolution. Since that time, when the city passed their resolution, we've turned our attention now to our local schools. And that's why we've started something called a Green Schools campaign, Green Schools Now, because our school system is in the process of investing millions in bond money into new schools and school repair work. And we'd like to see them do that all very sustainably. We're asking our local school board to commit to transition to 100% clean energy by 2050. Imagine what it would be like if all our local schools had solar panels on them, and if all the local school buses were electric vehicles. And there may be some good federal money coming to schools across the country to fund things like electric school buses. We don't want our county to miss that opportunity.
Schools in particular, is it to set an example for the children who go to school, or just simply because it's a public building that can be?
You know, the children need that example for sure. We also know that K-12 schools have an important part to play in reducing carbon pollution because they're major energy consumers. And if you look at all office space nationwide, schools use as much as 43% of that. Yeah. So it's no small thing. And have you heard of the LEED certification program of the U.S. Green Building Council? I mentioned that earlier when I was talking about the Proximity Hotel. But they have a program called, they have a focus on schools, the Center for Green Schools, where they provide a lot of support of knowledge, about how schools can try to convert to cleaner energy and more sustainable practices. So we're asking our school system to look at that and be part of this and move forward and pass a resolution that commits them to this type of transition that the city is going to make.
Okay, so I have to ask though, is there any environmental downside to transitioning to solar? For example, it requires a lot of rare earth minerals that need to be mined. And I know that the mining can cause a lot of pollution. The dust gets in the rivers, the chemicals used for mining can get into the water supply, into the earth, and it can destroy the topsoil in some areas. Is that a legitimate concern, or is it just something that's just going to be the side effect that we have to accept to fight the greater environmental issue of climate change?
It's definitely a concern, and I hope over time, the way solar energy develops, that it can become cleaner and cleaner itself as a technology. But I think compared to the impact of fossil fuels, any threat from solar energy, like that, pales in comparison to what fossil fuels have done. Even things like the air pollution and the level of asthma that has affected so many people in such large numbers. I'm going to put in the chat a link to a really cool TED Talk. Now, this focuses more on nuclear power, but it does some work. I think this is if I remember correctly, this TED Talk has some statistics in it around the impact, because, I think nuclear energy is another place where the world is going to have to grapple with how to do that, because it may be an essential piece of the energy puzzle going forward.
And that one's a bit more controversial from what I understand.
It has been, yes. And part of that has been because of nuclear waste and because of concerns about the dangers that could be created around nuclear power plants. But a lot of those are being addressed. Bill Gates has taken a very, very strong position, saying that the only way we'll have any chance of reversing the climate crisis is with nuclear energy being part of the puzzle. Okay. And this particular TED Talk gives a lot of good information about why someone might change their mind about nuclear power, especially in the times we're in. But that issue around, each of these energy industries has these negatives to it, but fossil fuel has yeah, it all pales in the face of fossil fuel.
Okay. Okay. So what, now I have one more question, and this is something I've heard from like right-wing commentators when I listen to their commentary to hear their perspective. And they say that if there is like no green energy, if energy is not produced in a clean way, then switching to electric cars will just do no good, because it just changes the point of burning the fossil fuel from the car to the power plant. Have you heard of that argument before?
Yeah, so that's something I wondered about myself about
Yeah.
electric vehicles. Like, if the energy is being made with fossil fuels to run your car, what's that impact on the environment? And I understand that concern. In North Carolina, it doesn't tip that way. We get so much of our energy from nuclear power that
Wow, I didn't
it's
know.
already cleaner in the analyses to drive your electric vehicle. It's pretty clear if you're powering it in North Carolina that that's true. But I think, and I think there are other places where that's true. I think if you could get a rooftop solar panel, and if you could connect that directly to your car, wouldn't that be a beautiful future? You could know that your electric vehicle was powered completely with clean energy. I mean, that's the way I think we need to be going, right?
You could just, like, you could drive for much longer without even having to stop and charge. If that, do you see technology moving in that direction?
Oh, the cars now can go so far and charge so fast. More than 300 miles and charge very quickly with the right station and the right equipment. So electric vehicles are amazing. I mean, pretty much anybody who needs to buy a new car or buy any type of car, used cars, ought to be looking at the options in electric, for electric vehicles, and give up changing the oil in your car, for example, which would be a great benefit.
And with the, I just thought of something that you mentioned earlier, about how solar panels make people more,
Independent?
yeah, independent. So would
Yeah.
that actually change the way that the power grid works? Because I've read something about how, with people like putting solar panels on the roofs, some of them will actually be able to sell back into the power grid. So my question is, would switching to solar make the power grid more or less connected based on that? Because I could see a situation where it's like, well, each house has its own like individual power. There doesn't need to be as much like connection to the centralized grid. Or would that make it more centralized when people start selling power back into the grid?
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting questions around how that affects the grid. And I think
Yeah.
part of some of the big, huge bill around infrastructure that President Biden got passed has a lot of money in it, funding to analyze the grid, upgrade the grid, figure out some of these problems. And in terms of what the future holds for us, if we make the choice to get a sustainable energy policy in place and fund it properly and support the grid the way it needs to be, I think we can make tremendous progress.
The state of our national power grid now is actually a huge national security concern. The CNN journalist Ted Koppel wrote the book Lights Out about what would happen if there was an attack on the US grid. And if you think about it, everything, our hospitals, our schools, our work, like our logistics for the entire economy, could potentially, if the power grid were not there to support that. I mean, we see what happens in a smaller scale, like the storms that happened in Texas last year, and how much devastation that caused. The entire national grid would be so much worse if there were to be a successful attack on it. I mean, have you ever considered like the national security implications of solar power in your work?
So really more in our work, what we're trying to do is, like I said, have an impact on our local governmental institutions, including now the school board, in trying to get more green energy and renewable energy being used here in Greensboro, make Greensboro the greenest city in the Southeast.
Yeah.
we got a lot of ways to go. And our school board has not yet passed this policy that we're asking for. They have not made the commitment yet to try to transition to clean energy. And we could really use the support of you and anyone you know, or your listeners, in contacting our local school board and asking them to pass this policy.
Yeah,
I'm going to put in the chat a couple of links to the Board of Education site, the Guilford County Schools site, so people have information on how to contact the Board of Education. Because if y'all would be willing, whoever's listening, if you and everyone else would be willing to email the Board of Education and ask them to support moving to 100% clean energy by 2050, we would be very appreciative of that support for our campaign.
I'm curious, though, why is there still resistance to this idea on the school board? Is it a cost issue, or some local politics that have prevented this? What is the biggest obstacle right now in the campaign?
Well, so it's not that they have said no to us yet. You know, we're putting out an ask and we're waiting to hear the response, and we hope it comes soon.
Right.
I would envision that part of the issue could be financially related. We know that ultimately over time, green energy saves money, but upfront, sometimes the costs are higher than the cheaper fossil fuel option. And so it could be more expensive potentially in the beginning upfront, especially with the limitations on financing that are available in North Carolina. Some states have better financing options that schools can access for putting solar energy and solar panels on their school buildings. Certain financing arrangements that are not allowed in North Carolina at the moment, things that Duke Energy has fought. So, you know, we hope that over time.
Not allowed. And how did Duke Energy impact that?
Sorry, what is that?
Did you say certain energy financing arrangements are not allowed because Duke Energy fought it?
Well, Duke Energy has, okay, so for example, here in Greensboro, the Beloved Community Center entered into an arrangement with North Carolina Warren, where they were trying to access renewable energy with North Carolina Warren, providing solar panels for their building, and then they would pay them back over time. And Duke Energy filed a lawsuit about that and held that that was an illegal arrangement for them to have for the financing of those solar panels. It's not allowed to have certain types of loans made in North Carolina. But in any event, that's unfortunate. We hope that over time that will change and more financing arrangements will be available, because that can be a problem. Duke Energy does have a number of programs that do support things like the installation of solar panels, though, through their own rebate programs, money available to nonprofit institutions and other things. But we believe that needs to be expanded greatly, because the need is so great.
Does Duke Energy, I'm wondering, and this might not be well known, have they been known to donate to local people running for office? Because it seems like that's
yeah, I'm afraid I don't have all the information for you on that at hand. I don't. Okay. We could look into that to get, I could help you find some more information about that if it was of interest. I don't have that though.
To know if there's some sort of that kind of corruption going on. I mean, a lawsuit to prevent solar energy panels getting installed just sounds evil. I can't.
Well, it was about the financing arrangement. So, and I could send you some more information on that if you were interested too, and what was going on there.
So would you say what was it? But I'm curious, what could the real motive have been? They want like their solar panels to get installed, or they don't want like this company?
That's not my understanding of the situation. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, that's all the questions I have. So I don't know if there's anything you would like to close out with that we haven't gotten to yet.
Well, we do have our website that I gave you the link for in the chat, and I hope that people will visit that and follow our campaign to ask the schools to join in with this committing to 100% clean energy. they're going to be building a lot of schools. We so hope that the next bond referendum passes and that the schools are given the money they need to build some new buildings and to upgrade the facilities, which are desperately in need of it. And we want to see all that work done so that the schools are very sustainable going forward and can make that transition to the type of energy we need in the future.
Okay. Well, Margaret, it has been great having you on the show. You gave me a lot of information and a lot of new things to think about. And so I'm really happy to have heard from you.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Well, this has been Philosophisn't, the podcast about the philosophy of traditional philosophers, historians, political theorists, and the philosophy of doers. So how would you classify yourself in that dichotomy?
Oh, well, I hope I could be kind of a little bit of both.
Okay. Well,
Definitely want to be a doer, though.
Okay. Thank you, Margaret. It's been great having you.
Thank you. Have a good day.